You're listening to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. Season ticket holders and lifelong fans with neighborhood ties discuss Cubs news and neighborhood happenings. Here's your hosts, Jeremy and Pat.
Hello and welcome to the Wrigleyville Nation podcast. This is episode 360 of the podcast. My name is Jeremy Deemer and I'll be your host. I'm joined as always by my co-host. He's my cousin and he's high atop Wrigleyville tonight. How's it going, Pat?
It's going well, Jeremy. Thanks.
It is a picture-perfect, beautiful Labor Day Monday as we record the podcast. And the Cubs are back at home, starting a homestand as we turn the calendar to September and the last 4 weeks of the season.
That's right.
2, 3, 5 weeks of the season. No, 4 weeks. Yeah, the 4 weeks, and then we'll do a wrap-up pod. So we have
25. We got 25 games left.
Yes, we have 5 podcasts scheduled over the next 4 weeks, and we will be briefly talking about the week that was. We'll look ahead to the week that will be. We'll talk Cubs playoff standings, all the happenings. But before we do, let's recap what was an incredibly successful road trip. They were exceeding even we had tame expectations going in, but we wanted to see them do well and beat up on the bad teams at Miami, at Pittsburgh, at Washington. 8-1 has to exceed all expectations. Who knew the Pirates bullpen was going to be that bad?
I mean, 8-1, 6-0 on the week. I saw a stat that the Cubs scored 89 runs in those 9 games, and they are the first team to score at least 14 runs 4 times in an 8-game span since the 1897 Boston something or other. I don't know what they were. They were the Red Sox back then. No, it was a great week, and when you score that many runs, it's funny. The pitching just sort of doesn't matter. Like, we spent so much of this season worried about the bullpen crashing on us or losing close games or, coming within a run here or feeling like we were going to win a game and then give up a couple runs or just not score enough. And I think objectively, like the rotation, the bullpen in specific, has been kind of in tatters here the last couple weeks, and it doesn't even matter because when you're scoring as many runs as the Cubs are, you can give up a couple runs late. And in fact, in a couple of those games, the Cubs didn't quite blow the game, but they had a huge lead and they did give up runs late in the game, but they still held on and won, which was great.
That Friday Miami game could have been a real different tone as they gave up a couple runs late, still held on to win 6-3, but that was scary. And then both of those wins in Washington were both 9 in. Like, you didn't feel good. You didn't feel good going into the 9th inning of those first 2 Washington games.
But when you score, a minimum of basically 7, anywhere between 7 and 18 runs a game, it gives you quite the leverage there, whereas there were times in April, May, June when they were scoring 7 runs in a 3-game stretch, right, in a whole series as opposed to per game. And I think when we look at it too, the losing that 3rd game, the Sunday game at Miami, and we podcasted about this, it was a real downer because we were like, we really need a sweep. They didn't get it. Then they go to Pittsburgh, they win those first 2, and then on that getaway day, I think it was the Wednesday, Paul Skeens was going for the Pirates, their ace rookie pitcher. Kyle Hendricks for the Cubs got shelled. The Cubs fell way behind, and everybody was like, here we go again. 2 out of 3 isn't good enough. We just can't get over the hump. The Cubs are done. The Cubs are done. And if you look at people's Twitter feeds or any other commentary from that afternoon, it was pretty much this resignation feeling, right? The Cubs just can't get over the hump. And then something weird happened. The Cubs ended up having the first 7-run deficit turned into a win in Major League Baseball in 7 years. Like, thousands of games were played, and I think it was like over 1,100 times the team had been down by 7, in the 7th and had not come back, and the Cubs did, and it was so it was a pretty unexpected, monumental kind of event. And instead of coming away with 2 out of 3, the Cubs swept. They were down, I think it was 10-3 headed into the seventh, and they scored 2 in the seventh, 3 in the eighth, and 6 in the ninth. With our friend of the show, good friend of the show, Bethencourt, with
Christian,
7 runs batted in.
Christian Bethencourt, yeah. What a week he
And
had.
yeah, I mean, you can say that about a lot of players, but there. I think the key moment of that game, which could turn out to be the key moment of the entire season, frankly, if this all plays out, in the ninth inning of that game. I don't know if you remember, but I had the pleasure of watching that ninth inning, and the Cubs started rallying back. They were within 1 run. They'd come back to 10-9, so that was in and of itself a big deal. They had runners at second and third, 2 outs. Pete Armstrong at the plate. He was 4 for 4 coming into that. And Bednar, the pitcher for the, I guess, closer still closer for Pittsburgh. The person who has been their closer for the last couple of years, for sure. And up until that game, David Bednar was pitching, and he could not throw strikes. And the Pirates made the decision to intentionally walk PCA. Putting him on first base. And I guess I kind of see the wisdom, because Armstrong is so fast, and this really gets in a lot of his value this week, was just the chaos on the base pads that he causes other defenses. But he's so fast, they're probably worried he'd hit a soft grounder and they wouldn't be able to throw him out at first base and the tying run would score. So they walked him. He was also red hot, so I see that. Although in the back of my mind, I'm like, if it's me, and my closer is struggling to throw strikes and is walking people and is throwing wild pitches and things like that, I don't think I walk Pete Armstrong. I just pitch to him and watch my pitcher throw balls a foot out of the strike zone and see if he'll swing at it. I mean,
we just did that.
Pretty much everything.
Yeah, we just did that podcast where Matt Trueblood was breaking down how much PCA will swing and strike out. And so, I had the same thoughts saying, they obviously were not listening to our podcast when making that decision.
So they walk him, and then Bethencourt comes through with the big hit. And so after Matt's analysis of PCA that week, I've been doing some paying attention to this. His theory was that we're going to see a little bit of regression from Amaya and Pete Armstrong, because they were so hot. I mean,
sure.
Fair enough, right? It wasn't this week, though. They turned around and they had even better weeks this week. So it will probably come. It just didn't come yet. But I was paying close attention to Pete Armstrong's at bats to see how many pitches he was taking. Not many.
No.
even though he was hot all week, and even though, hey, look, I'm not going to poo-poo a 458 batting average and an OPS of 1,000, right? I mean, that's great. But he was swinging at pitches and hitting them, successfully and safely. But he still does not take many pitches. So it's not some newfound plate discipline. It's just he's just red hot right now. And so it worked out well for the Cubs in that instance. And he ended up getting on base all 5 times that game and having yet another great week. In fact, the whole team this week was great. I was looking at, so other than Bush and Bellinger, who are a little bit down, this week, every Cub regular, and Bethencourt while you throw them in there, so like say eight different Cubs, but I'm talking Swanson, Suzuki, PCA, Paredes, Happ, Horner, Amaya, all those guys. The lowest OPS, the lowest on-base plus slugging percentage of that entire group was Amaya. He struggled at 977. So basically the Cubs had about 7 Albert Pujols in their lineup, 7 Miguel Cabreras in their lineup, 7 Barry Bonds in their lineup at all times this week. And when that happens, you set records that were previously set in like 1897. And when that happens, you go 6-0. And when that happens, you have laugher after laugher, because that is just an amazing hot streak from 7/9 of your team all at once.
The Cubs went 18-8 overall in August, so they did take advantage of those bad teams and that soft schedule, which they had to do. They had to leapfrog a bunch of teams. They do have to play Pittsburgh again this week. We'll preview the week that will be. But what are the odds that Paul Skeens says, I'm taking this 9 innings this time?
It'll be interesting to see how this will be the fourth time the Cubs have faced Skeens. I think the first time, I think it might have been his first game.
It was his first game. It was his debut.
Yeah. And I didn't say they lit him up, but he struggled, and the Cubs did well against him. Although I think the Cubs might have blown the game later on at that point. But in his second start, he shut the Cubs down, and then this time he struggled a little bit. I mean, he didn't pitch terribly, but threw a lot of pitches. Like he did not have a lot of clean innings, and as a result, had to leave the game after like 6 innings. So I think that's the strategy. It's the old Kerry Wood strategy, right? Make him throw a lot of pitches, and maybe get a couple of runs off him early. By a couple, I mean like 2. But then get him out of the game and let that Pirates bullpen cook, because it's like their bullpen's like a meth lab. I mean, that thing is very flammable. So you really need to be careful with them. So yeah, that's the strategy.
Yeah, it was watching. I mean, how many times has that happened to the Cubs this season, where they've had a great starting pitching outing and the bullpen lost the game for them? It was great to see them on the other end of that.
We had that infamous Padres game early in the year where we blew a 7-run lead, although we blew that lead like in the 3rd or 4th inning as opposed to waiting till the 7th inning. So it has happened, and now it's time for a little payback for the rest of the league. So I'm pretty excited about that. We also saw this week the return, maybe I would say the departure of Kyle Hendricks, but certainly Kyle Hendricks was at his nadir on Wednesday. And then we saw the return this weekend of Jordan Wicks, who is the first Cub pitcher to ever win games on his birthday in consecutive years.
Yeah, it's good to see Jordan Wicks back. We were debating whether it was worth bringing him back this season, or just shutting him down for the rest of the year. But glad to see him come back.
It was kind of now or never, right? Like you weren't going to wait till the middle of September to do it.
He gets activated, as well as Miles Mastrobuoni got recalled as well.
Got to get him back. Yeah. What happened to this idea that Canario was going to come up, or Casey, or any of these other guys? I guess no, huh?
And you had Jordan Wicks getting his second win with 5 innings pitched, 4 hits, 1 earned run. The interesting stat, he was 0 walks, but 0 strikeouts. So
against a Washington team that is willing to strike out if you let him.
Yes.
He's sort of the anti DJ Hertz, I guess, is what he is. 0 strikeouts. And so if you go back through history, this doesn't happen very often. It doesn't happen at all in the modern times, right? Like this doesn't happen anymore. But in Cubs history, it has happened a couple times where a Cubs pitcher's gotten a win without recording a strikeout. I think it's happened 3 other times, or at least 3 times in my lifetime. And do you want to take a guess at who might have done that?
Let's see. I believe Kyle Hendricks was one that did that.
Kyle Hendricks did that. That's right. Early in his career. One of your favorite Cub pitchers, Lefty, also a former Pirate, 20-game winner, did it in 2002. He was the ace of our pitching staff.
John Lieber?
John Lieber, that's right. And then one of my favorite pitchers from when I was young, who had a great rookie year and then got hurt and was never the same, Mike Harkey did it.
Oh, sure.
And if you want to go all the way back, Lynn McLaughlin did it back, I think, in the late 70s or early 80s. But back in those days, in the late 70s and early 80s, as I've noted from my 1984 review, you had a lot of games where, although 0 strikeouts might be rare, but strikeouts could be really low. Like a pitcher could get away with striking out 3 or 4 batters and pitching 8 innings and 5 hits and 0 walks. It was just not it was much more pitch to contact era than it is now. But that's basically now 45 years worth of, and it's only happened, I guess, 4 other times. So very rare. Let's hope he strikes out some more batters when he has to face the Yankees.
Someone
of that nature, right?
Yeah, we'll get there in a second as we look at the schedule ahead. So after the Cubs did what they needed to do, they defeated the bad teams. They actually swept teams. Now, none of this 2 out of 3 like we were lamenting coming into this. They actually swept both the Pirates and the Nationals. They were able to leapfrog 2 of the teams ahead of them in the standings. They, with their, if we look at their 9-1 week, their last 10 games, the Cubs went 9-1. They passed the Giants, who went 3-7 in their last 10 games, and the Cardinals, who treaded water at 6-4. They were able to pass both those teams. Cubs sitting at 71-66 as of the time of this recording. That puts them behind now only the New York Mets, who the Cubs are 3 games behind Atlanta for the final spot, and the New York Mets are 1 game behind Atlanta. So still have to leapfrog 2 teams technically in New York and Atlanta. But the Cubs have a possibility.
5.5 games behind Atlanta. And Atlanta had when he's 4-3 weeks, very Cub-like actually. They swept the Twins on the road, a tough Twins team, right? 10-6, 8-6, 5-1. So they beat them handily. And then they lost 3 out of 4 at Philadelphia. And if this isn't a Cubs kind of record this season, I don't know what is. They lose to the Phillies 5-4. They have a lead. They blow it late. They lose 5-4. Then they win 7-2 by 5 runs going away. Then they lose 3-0 and 3-2 in extra innings. Like that's like a Cubs week, right? Like,
very much so.
for most of this year. And as a result, they go 4-3, and the Cubs gain 2.5 very meaningful games. And the Cubs really needed to do it this week, right? Because the Braves played arguably one of the toughest weeks, if not the toughest week, they're going to play the rest of the year. 4 at Philly, 3 at Minnesota. And their schedule starts to soften up a little bit because, we talk about the Cubs and the easy second half schedule. Well,
yeah, let's start. We'll start with the Braves. Yeah, let's start and look ahead at the Braves' upcoming schedule. Softening up is an understatement.
Yeah, they come home and they play Colorado for 3 and Toronto for 3. They have a makeup game at home against Cincinnati, and then they go to Washington for a couple. Then they play the Dodgers for 4 at home. Then they're at Cincinnati for 3, at Miami for 3, and then at the end of the year they play the Mets and the Royals. So that could be tricky. We'll see where those teams are by then, but their schedule is now they're kind of on the downslide of their schedule. They've had a couple weeks against tough teams. The Cubs, obviously have a mixed schedule the rest of the way. They've got some tough teams coming up, but they also have some easy teams. So it's not quite as disparate as the Braves schedule.
Yeah, we'll go into a little bit of detail here on the Cubs' upcoming schedule. But before we do, let's talk about the Mets schedule because the Mets are still in front of the Cubs. The Mets are at home for Boston for 3, and then Cincinnati for 3 before they go to Toronto for 3, and then at Philadelphia. Then more Washington for 3, and then Philadelphia for 4. And the Phillies may be setting their playoff rotation at that point.
We'll see. Yeah, the Mets definitely on paper have the toughest schedule the rest of the way with the 7 games against the Phillies, 3 against the Braves, 3 against Milwaukee. But as you pointed out, that last week of the season, it's really hard to know right now, how meaningful those games will be for teams.
And that takes us to the Cubs schedule. So let's look ahead to the week that will be and the month that's going to happen here for the Cubs. September opens, we mentioned, with 3 at home against Pittsburgh. A
Pittsburgh team that, by the way, if they aren't looking for revenge after last week,
yes.
I don't know. I mean, then they're dead man walking at that point, right? Like, you've got to think that they're embarrassed by what happened last week. Not that that's going to make a difference necessarily, but I would assume they're going to come in with a little bit of a chip on their shoulder.
Well, and we have to play their 2 best pitchers again a week later.
Right.
Like that's
after beating them both last week, right?
Yes.
So yeah.
So it'll be tough to see a sweep there. And then the New York Yankees come to town. This is Anthony Rizzo's return to Wrigley Field. Very excited about that. This closes the book on everybody's return back to Chicago here.
Took long enough, right? But yeah, finally.
So looking forward to the Anthony Rizzo video packages. not a dry eye in the house, I assume, when we see those.
No, especially he of all the players coming
Right.
back.
Our captain. He was the team captain.
Yeah.
So 3 against the Yankees, those will be tough. And then it continues to remain tough as the Cubs go out west to play the Dodgers, which is always a hard series. Even just going out west is always tough for the Cubs. They go
It's a tough 6 games, right? 3 at home against the Yankees and 3 on the road against L.A.
And then 3 in Colorado, which is always weird. That team is bad.
Yeah, they are.
But it's always weird in Colorado. And then they come home for 3 against the A's and 4 against the Nationals.
Is that because the A's don't have a stadium, or do they play all the games on the road? No, but that is so after that Dodgers series, after the 6 games against the Yankees and Dodgers, if you can even go 3-3 in that, I mean 4-2 would be great, but even if you go 3-3 in that, you've got 9 games against really bad teams. You've got, between Colorado, Oakland, and Washington, 10 games, because the Washington's a 4-game stretch. That's 10 more games you could get really healthy in, so let's hope that those games matter at that point.
Yeah, and then they close out that last week, 3 at Philadelphia. We don't know what that would look like. And then 3 against Cincinnati at home. If those are meaningful, could be really frustrating, the way the Cubs play the Reds. But yeah, it's there's not a lot of games left.
25.
The Mets and Atlanta will play each other, which when there are 2 teams in front of you is frustrating, because if they split that, nothing happened.
Unless you sweep your games.
So so if you lose your series against the Yankees and Dodgers and win against the A's and Nationals, you've also tread water here. So it's really the next week and a half is going to be really telling about if those 3 games are, if you can make up those 3 games or not. The current
there is no time for bad weeks, right? You can't go 2-4 the rest of the way in a week. There's too much ground to make up.
The current playoff projection for the Cubs, 6.9% for them to
up from 3.7. Right?
Yes. So still only 6.9% chance for the Cubs to make the playoffs at this point. And you can see why when you look at the schedule. This is it's hard to make up those games because you can't tie. You have to pass 2 teams in 3 games. Yep.
Well, let's not forget though, we've got Craig Counsell, who is known for his September miracles, as our manager. So there's that. We've been on the receiving end of that several times.
Very much so. So do we want to make a prediction for the week? 3 against Pittsburgh, 3 against New York at home, the Yankees.
Yeah, and the Yankees aren't, they're good, but they're not they lost 2 out of 3 to the Nationals.
I believe the Cardinals beat them.
Yeah, I mean they're not. That's the thing about baseball, right? These guys are not. It's not like you're playing the Bulls from the '90s or something.
Sure.
There are wins to be had here. I think the Cubs. I could see the Cubs. They are going to get Garrett Cole, which is unfortunate. I think the Cubs will go 3-3. I'd like to go 4-2, but I'd say 3-3. My fear is this. When the entire team has been so red hot for an extended period of time, like basically almost 2 weeks offensively, you got to think, unless we are the greatest team in the history of baseball, which at the rate we're going, we might end up being, you've got to think there's going to be a little bit of regression there. And so that means that, Michael Busch or Bellinger might get hot, but you've got 7 guys who are red hot, and I hope they don't all go cold at the same time, but they are going to face some decent pitching. So, the circumstances are such that I could see the Cubs having a couple of these frustrating 2-1, 3-2 losses, at some point during this week. But they're all at home, and I feel good about that in general. So I think 3-3 would be conservative, 4-2 would be ideal.
I'm gonna agree on the 3-3 week. I do think that it's tough because it's Steele against Skeens, so you don't. So we have an Imanaga game in here, which is good against Pittsburgh. So I think that's a victory. But between Tyone pitching against Jones and Steele against Skeens, I think that you drop one of those games. Your bullpen does at least, and so I'd say a 2-1 Pirates series and then a 1-2 Yankees series at home. For
the Cubs are coming off a 9-1 stretch here too. So generally speaking, except for on the south side of Chicago, the baseball gods tend to even things out a little bit with this stuff. It's hard to play 900 baseball, right? I mean, that's just hard to keep up.
Yeah. So if we see the Cubs go 3-3 this week, and at the same time you see Atlanta go, like 5-2, that's gonna be rough against.
Yeah, we let's not see that, because that would not that doesn't work for the analysis. We're gonna need now. Granted, they're playing the Rockies, but again, let them drop a game to the Rockies, and Toronto can always beat you. So if we go 3-3 and they go 3-3, or we both go 4-2, be nice to kind of stay even with them this week somehow. I guess if we come back next week with 19 games left in the season and the Cubs are 4 back, which really means 5 back because of the tiebreaker, it's still doable because the Cubs do have that super easy stretch, but it's starting to get, the math is starting to squeeze you again, like it felt last week when they're 5.5 back, right? There isn't a lot of room or a lot of time to fall behind at this point. You kind of got to get ahead, which I know is very, very insightful, but no, it's just 85% of the season is done. This is the time to stand up and
the tough part is you still who's the Cubs closer in the ninth at this point in those close games. Well, we have to see. We haven't seen a close game in a while. So when they do have a close game, who is it on your when you look at the roster?
Well, I mean, Porter Hodge seems to have done pretty well for himself, and Keegan Thompson came in sort of out of necessity, I guess.
Yeah, desperation.
Desperation. But I think that at least in the short term, you'll probably see Counsell looking at the circumstances. I mean, I don't think they want to use Tyson Miller necessarily, although I kind of like him. But I think Hodge has pitched really well, and Jorge Lopez seems to be hurt. So that's problematic. But Keegan Thompson, scares me a little bit. He can. Look, they've had a lot of injuries to the bullpen, so it's not as if they have a lot of great options. So they're just going to have to, mix and match and hope things work out for the best. And maybe Hodge, it'd be a great story if he could come in. I mean, other teams have had that happen where a young guy comes in and does really well. I guess Lopez did pitch against Washington for an inning, but he's only pitched once now in the last 9 days. So maybe he's just, I don't know if he's tired or what's going on with him, but I think we'll just have to see. And if we blow a couple games, or even, if the Cubs blow 2 saves this week and it costs them 2 wins, that'll be the big topic for next week. But if they can win the games they win, by a comfortable enough margin, it won't matter.
All right. And as we get ready to see Craig Counsell's September magic, we'll be back next week to break it all down, and we will have a guest back for next week. Here, keeping it short and light on a holiday Monday. Here, we close the show as we do every single week, where we take a trip back to 1984. We visit on the 40th anniversary of the Chicago Cubs 1984 playoff team. We parachute in to 1984 and see how those Cubs are doing. As last time we visited them, Pat, the Cubs were starting to pull away.
They were, and this week was no different. I mean, they weren't 6-0 like the 2024 Cubs were, but they were 6-1. So they had a great week. They swept Cincinnati, including a doubleheader sweep after a rainout. Which I haven't gone back and done the math, but the Cubs had a lot of doubleheader sweeps in 1984.
Yes.
That is not something that's easy to do. Typically, if you look at the stats historically, doubleheader sweeps have been rare. But the Cubs did it against Cincinnati, and then they played, and then they had Atlanta came to town, and the Cubs won 3 out of 4 against Atlanta. We had another great start from Rick Sutcliffe, 8 innings, 5 hits, 7 strikeouts, 2 runs, and got another win, which he was doing pretty much every week we've talked about now. It's almost like he could win an award for this. And Ryan Sandberg had a nice game with a home run. The thing that I wanted to kind of highlight today is the Cubs brought up a guy from the minors who either pinch hit or started in every game this week, and was sort of a new addition to the team. And the reason I brought him up is it's sort of like the Bethencourt situation where, when you have those seasons where things go well and the magical seasons, somebody kind of comes out of nowhere and gives you a boost, whether it's a Randall Simon or a Luis Salazar, or pick any of those Cubs seasons of the past where you're like, oh yeah, I remember that guy. Jim Edmonds, that somebody comes in and does really well. And so this year I wanted to focus on a guy by the name of Thad Bosley. Does that name ring a bell to you?
Sure does, yeah.
So Thad Bosley, who I have a picture of from 1984. I don't know if you can see it here, but he's in the middle right here.
I'll hold it up a little higher. Hold it up a little higher. There you go.
This is him at the airport when he was with the Iowa Cubs, traveling with Dan Roan and Billy Hatcher, 2 future major league players, but they were all in the minors at the time. This was the Down on the Farm report from earlier that year, and they talk a little bit about him in that. He finally makes it up to the majors, and he only has 112 plate appearances, but it's a sizable number. And the thing about him that I noticed in 1984 is, and I know baseball statisticians and sabermetrics people can debate this back and forth, but the concept of being a clutch hitter, like if somebody's a clutch hitter versus just not a clutch hitter, and that you can go back and look at stats to see how you do in high leverage situations and medium and low leverage. Well, Thad Bosley had a unique gift of doing well in high leverage situations. So in 1984, while he hit 296 and had a 793 OPS, which are fantastic as a bench player in their own right, in high leverage situations, he hit 450 with a 1.25 OPS, which you say, wow, that's, small sample size, but, lucky for him, lucky for them. Well, not really, because he had a history and became sort of known for this the next couple of years. He's a fantastic pinch hitter. I think he led the league in pinch hits one year. In 1985, the following season, he had an expanded role. He had 202 plate appearances. So you're like a third of the season he played. And he hit 328 with a 902 OPS. His on-base plus slugging percentage in high leverage situations that year was 1.024 also. So he was basically like a baseball Hall of Famer in high leverage situations. He'd come in and pinch hit and get hits all the time. So much so that in 202 plate appearances, he ended up putting up 2.3 WAR, which is pretty fantastic considering a lot of those were just pinch hit appearances. It wasn't like he got to play the field as much,
sure.
Right? You extrapolate that over a whole season, that's a WAR of like over 7 or 7.5, which for a Cub position player would be, virtually unheard of. So Thad Bosley, who had a great week this week, was somebody who kind of added that extra spark in the 84 team in a way that I think was notable and deserves some recognition. The last thing I'll say about the 1984 season is, Lee Smith was one hell of a workhorse. That guy came in and closed out games all the time. The number of innings he pitched back then, when you talk about closers now and who the closer is, in the 5-day stretch for the period that we just discussed, Lee Smith had a win and 3 saves. That doesn't happen anymore. Like, people don't do that, right? And he pitched in the other game too, by the way. So, they just brought him out every game, and sometimes for more than one inning. And he came through for him that week. And the Cubs leave the week up 5 games over the Mets, with only 4 weeks left in the season. 5-game lead seemed insurmountable back then. We'll see what happens to the 1984 Cubs next week.
It's it's funny to think about 5 games for them as we're talking about the 3 games for the Cubs to get to the final wild card spot, which would be like I can't even imagine what place that would be in 1984 season.
In 1984 they were 5 games ahead of the Mets for the best record in the National League.
Yeah.
But they had to beat the Mets because only 2 teams went to the playoffs from the National League back in those days. So yeah, it was a different world.
Always a great time checking in on the 1984 Cubs as we get to the end of the season there. So, and sometime before, probably closer to the end of the season, for those of you who haven't listened to every episode of this podcast, we will be doing a supercut of all of the 1984 Cubs segments. I'm gonna put them all together into one special episode podcast that will come out sometime either right after the season or right before the end of the season. There, we will release the 1984 segments as one giant supercut episode. So stay tuned for that. Make sure you're staying subscribed to the podcast. And if you want to see what Pat was showing during that segment, make sure you're signed up for the YouTube channel over at youtube.com. Search for Wrigleyville Nation Podcast. Give us a subscribe. You can get all the video content. We have a video version of the podcast there. Even if you don't consume your podcast via the video form, a subscription there helps us work the algorithm so other Cub fans can find the show. So we appreciate your support there as well. You can find us on all the social media platforms at Wrigleyville Nat. And of course, WrigleyvilleNation.com has the entire back catalog of this podcast, as well as all the links I described and all the ways to support the show. And nobody supports the show more than our patrons over at patreon.com/Wrigleyville Nation. There, they help keep us ad-free for another season, almost done. Ad-free because of all the support over by our friends at the Patreon there. You can also support the show by getting merch. We've got merch. Don't forget our TeePublic shop. You can click on the link. It's pinned to our X profile. You can go to our Instagram. It's there. And, of course, the store tab at WrigleyvilleNation.com. All kinds of good stuff there. We got mugs, hats, shirts, all kinds of great stuff. All great ways to support the show. And with that, we're going to wrap it up. Any final thoughts, Pat?
I think this will be a telling week for the Cubs. If they can even tread water and be 3 games out coming into next week, I think things can get really interesting, and it could be a really fun September in Chicago.
And just having them be interesting is going to be extremely important, as there's so much interest in the Bears starting up here next week that it'll be great to have something to watch, both football and baseball wise, here in Chicago at the same time.
I mean, this was about as fun a week as I can remember the Cubs having in the last 5 years, right?
Yeah, so much fun. So and it'll be fun this week with getting to see the Rizzo stuff as well.
And they're at home this week, so it's even more fun when they win at home.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, one last thing. I did venture over to Wrigley Field on Thursday night for the Pearl Jam concert.
Oh, nice.
Eddie Vedder came to wish us well. It was a great show. So glad we could make use of the stadium, even when the Cubs are on the road.
Excellent. And with that, we're going to wrap it up and call it a podcast. Pat, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thanks again, everyone, for listening. We'll talk to you again next time.